Our topic today is, can America compete? Put another way, can we get our swagger back? Can we reclaim our mojo?
Can we compete? Yeah, I think we are as competitive as we were in 1980 when Reagan was president. But what's changed is the rules of the game. Basically, we went from being in a polite foot race with 7 European nations and Japan to being in the kind of economic equivalent of the New York Marathon with tens of thousands of runners. The Berlin Wall comes down, communism ends, capitalism is ascendant, Reagan's great legacy to us, and what does it give us? It gives us 800 million Chinese workers to compete with. Capitalism is ascendant in India 3 years later, 300 million workers in India join the workforce. So the markets are bigger for us, but the competition is a lot stiffer. We can compete, but we need to change our yardstick. Getting our swagger back, that may be a bit much to ask. It's never going to be the same. We're going to have to get used to being just another superpower.
So to retain and enhance our competitiveness, which you see as roughly equal to what it was, but the competition has gotten tougher. So relatively, we feel worse about where we stand.
In the long run, the thing we have to do is fix education. We need to match the skills that are going to be required in this new competitive global environment with the skills that we're producing.
Merrill, where do you come down on this? What do you think is the thing that we need to address most to retain our competitiveness or reclaim it?
Well, it's interesting. Having heard the conversation so far, I'm going to want to throw something on the table we haven't talked about yet, and that's healthcare. Healthcare is currently 17% of our GDP. It's growing. It's headed for 25% of GDP. We just had a huge national debate over healthcare reform, and I think it's pretty transparent that we don't have a consensus, actually, even though a bill was passed about how to solve that problem. And I think that if you're going to move to when I talk about a social consensus, we have to say, okay, we are an aging society. It's inevitable that we're going to spend more on healthcare as we age. But why do we spend 5, 6, 7 percentage points of GDP more on healthcare than any other country on Earth?
Why do we?
Well, we have the most expensive healthcare system, and a lot of people say that we have a lot of waste in our healthcare system.
Why is it?
Well, economists who've looked at it say prices are extremely high. We have the highest hospital prices in our hospital system. We have the highest prices for the technology. We are a driver of innovation in medical technology, and many of those were on display here yesterday. But the medical value of many of the technologies, once they are deployed, is really open to question, and in terms of the public health return for the prices that we pay for them. And so then we get into a debate that any individual might benefit, but can we afford to do that on a population basis? Are we getting our money's worth?
Are we getting our money's worth? Do we have care commensurate to the cost?
Absolutely not. We actually have a much poorer return on our healthcare investment than other countries around the world.
Merrill and I always go head to head on healthcare, because when you're saying are we getting our money's worth, the government controls over half of healthcare spending in this country already. The government does not do things efficiently. So for absolute certain, the government's involvement to that large a degree means that the costs are higher, number one. Number two, the lack of tort reform in the president's health care bill was probably the most egregious failing of that bill. You could read 14 different studies, but everyone will conclude, and we all know this, that tests and unnecessary procedures are done every day in every doctor's office to avoid getting sued. I was talking to some English people in England, naturally.
Funny how that
They could have been anywhere, but they were in England. A couple of weeks ago, and they couldn't believe the litigiousness of our medical society. Amazingly, because I think Britain is quite a litigious country, they don't have malpractice lawsuits. And clearly that drives up the cost of medicine. To Merrill's point, I think I've never been comfortable with this tagging of the percentage of GDP going to healthcare as being a necessary negative, because part of it is innovation. Part of it's because probably everyone in this room is taking more prescription drugs today than their antecedents took at the similar period in their life. Part of it is because we are asking for and we're demanding and taking more medication to keep ourselves healthy.
We're really going to have to devote a lot of time and energy to thinking about what actually advances the health of individuals and the population as a whole, what's worth paying for. This was the debate we didn't want to have
Outcomes.
over the last 2 years.
Outcomes.
This was
Right.
like people wanted to talk about death panels, they wanted to talk about rationing, and you can always throw that kind of stuff out there to cloud the debate. And yet I heard somebody about, living wills, end-of-life care. These are serious, serious discussions. They go on within our families. We can all tell our personal stories about what happened to their parents in the last months of their lives. We all go through that. Many of us are getting close to the age where we're going to start thinking about it for ourselves. And we just need a rational discussion where it's almost like get the politics out of this so that we can talk about these issues.
We talk a lot about the debt and the deficit, and there's the $100 billion plan that the Tea Party the insurgents, if you want to call them insurgents, have put forward. There's a $60 billion plan, and there is the president's plan as well. But those plans, none of them, to my observation, go at the big targets.
Well,
Medical care,
no, I don't think-
defense,
yeah.
or they go at discretionary domestic. They don't go at the big targets, which is healthcare, defense, and Social Security.
No,
And-
I don't think that's true, though. But I think if you look at the recommendations of the President's Fiscal Commission, it's a very broad-based assault on spending, and it has a lot of proposals.
Yes, but
in the
he
area.
has not totally embraced them.
Well, I understand that, but there are a lot of interesting ideas around, but there's very little political will right now to get behind it.
That's the problem. The people who are actually debating these issues in Congress are not taking the long-term view yet because no one wants to step on the entitlements issue. They're waiting for the president to do it. The president doesn't want to do it because he's up for re-election in 2012.
You go first.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
you
it's
go first.
totally
After you.
brinksmanship. And thankfully, we did have the Fiscal Deficit Commission come in and lay out a plan for reducing the federal deficits. And can I just say one other thing on this? This is not, we have had other times in our nation's history when everyone was worried about deficits, and we grew our way out of them,
Yes.
essentially. The problem is, if you look at the Congressional Budget Office projections for the next 30 years, they are assuming double-digit growth over the next high single-digit growth over the next 10 years, which we've never had before on a consistent basis. And yet still, our debt continues to increase to the point where the interest alone on the debt about 20 years from now is greater than our defense spending. That is when that's going to impact our ability to compete. That is going to weaken this country fundamentally.
We've moved from stimulus and job spending to spending cuts and fiscal soundness. And
Well, we've moved to
there's-
talking
but there's,
about
but
it.
there's no consensus in terms of timing. Even some of the most ardent deficit hawks, members of the President's Fiscal Commission like Erskine Bowles and Alan Simpson, they're all saying, yes, we need to do something about the deficit, but not this year. We have to continue to help grow the economy. We can start talking about the future and what we're going to do about it, but this is the wrong time to start cutting.
But maybe that's right.
I agree with that. I agree with that. I think we need to get this recovery, which I think is pretty much budding, if not in full flower, but we need to make sure that it's going to be sustainable.
Liz, let me sort of start to turn this battleship in.
I know, we're
in a
supposed to come
different-
up with solutions.
And that's where I want to go. I want you to give me 3 things that you would change in America's tax code that you believe will make America more competitive. What would you do?
Okay, this is not going to make anyone happy. I actually agree with the Fiscal Commission's idea of diminishing mortgage deductions. That's sort of a minor league thing, but really it affects a lot of Americans. If you actually know that the reality was they didn't say eliminate them, they said anything other than a secondary home. I think that's totally right. We have been basically, through our tax code, encouraging unnecessary and excess investment in real estate for 30 years. To what purpose? What we saw is it created, among other influences, it created a huge real estate bubble. There's no reason that those savings cannot be directed into infrastructure spending. I'm a great believer in private-public partnerships. I think Chris Christie in New Jersey is trying to use those. Governors across the country are trying to get public and private funds invested in new bridges and tunnels and plants and so forth. So I think that's one.
Okay, so there's one, and that's one among dozens and dozens and
But that's a
dozens
big
of
thing. That's a big thing.
I think it's a $100 billion deal or something like that. I forget what it
Yeah,
costs
maybe
as
more.
a tax expenditure. But is your point not merely that we need to address that, but more broadly that we need to address similar tax expenditures
Absolutely.
and subsidies that
everyone's talking about redoing the tax code, and I think everyone's got sort of their favorite thing they want to go after. Ethanol subsidies, that's effectively a tax issue. Repatriation of foreign earnings. We're the only country, I think, in the OECD world that has a tax situation where it is penalizes corporations for repatriating money.
So that's number
huge.
two. That's number two on your list of things that you would fix?
Okay, maybe that's number one,
Okay.
actually. I think that's a huge issue. Mortgages may be number two.
How about lowering tax rates?
Lowering
Lowering
tax rates, excuse me. I'd like a simplified tax code. In fact, that again has been proposed. Fewer deductions. I mean, really, why do we need child credits? If you want to have a child, and I have children, I'm just putting it out there, and so I love my tax credit for that, but I think that's kind of silly. We don't need the government to encourage us to have children. I mean, I think we really need to look at a lot of our basic presumptions. Our tax code, many of our legislative architecture, much of our architecture, is really reflective of the way the country was 50 years ago. And no one really has had the gumption and energy to come in and really redo a lot of this stuff. And that's what we need to do. There's a solution, right? We're supposed to be coming up with solutions.
Does our tax code, Merrill, make us uncompetitive?
Yeah, let me try to focus that conversation in. I mean, there are...
And what to do about it?
Well, let's look at the energy. I think that one place where we could start that might be able to build some political consensus for people outside that sector is in the energy sector. And let's just level the playing field in energy as a first, rather than go to the cap and trade system and some, other tax tinkerings. Let's do it from the other side. Let's remove all of the subsidies that we have in the tax code for energy at every level, and then let's see what's competitive. And I say that as somebody who, we're in the wake right now of the Japanese nuclear crisis, and yet nuclear was going to be a huge part of our energy solution. If you start looking at all the subsidies that nuclear got, the 2005 Energy Act, put tens of billions of dollars in new subsidies into that industry. Jonathan Rowe, who's the chairman of Exelon, went before the American Enterprise Institute in Washington a couple of weeks ago, and he's the biggest nuclear operator in the country, in Illinois and Pennsylvania. And he said, I wouldn't build a new nuclear plant today. The plants of the future, I can now see a pathway is going to be some combination of solar, wind, with gas as a bridging fuel. In other words, the wind goes at night, the sun runs during the day. I put the gas turbines in there, and I can have the same thing as a coal-fired plant or a nuclear-fired plant in one facility with a combination of that located in certain places. And, I'm fascinated. This is the guy who's the biggest nuclear, and this was before the Japanese fiasco, with the earthquake and the tsunami. So if he's saying that nuclear is not competitive, then I think that we really need to let the market decide what's going to work in the future. And the only way to get there is by removing all of the subsidies for all of the industries that are currently getting them.
Remove tax subsidies, repatriation of foreign profits, get rid of the mortgage interest deduction. Eric P., the Congress likes those things. They get lots of contributions from the real estate industry. They get lots of contributions from oil companies. Is there any possibility that those kinds of things will be taken out of the tax code so it's less distortive?
Well, I think that that's going to be a tough road to hoe, but I do think that there does seem to be some growing interest in tax reform. Perhaps not tax reform that results in increased revenues, but sort of revenue neutral overhaul of the tax code. I think that there will be efforts to reform the tax code, but people are going to have to give stuff up, and it's going to be some hard trade-offs.
And even if you
but
have
I think it's possible.
Even if you have what you
possible.
describe as a revenue-neutral reform of the tax code, somebody is going to pay more, and somebody is going to pay less, and those people who pay more are going to howl.
Yeah, and we've gone through other tax reforms in the past where, oil companies and others have lost tax shelters and other provisions that were very popular, back in the 80s, and then they were gone.
If I could indulge in some wild-eyed optimism here, I think that tax reform lies one of the major keys to getting the deficit under control. The Republicans have staked out a position, a sort of, a fail-safe position. They cannot raise taxes. However, if you reform taxes and you eliminate tax expenditures and then lower tax rates, you've done a very good deed for business because you've lowered the sort of tax consideration for that marginal dollar of investment or marginal dollar of income, and you've given Republicans cover to support, a change in the tax law. There is no constituency that wants this tax code.
Because we are in our last budgeted minute, and we are going to stick to the budget here. Let me come back to the question of solutions. Very quick answer. What is the solution to keeping America great?
The solution is not government. The solution is entrepreneurs.
Right, right.
I was anticipating this question, Tyler, and so I thought of a person who was, to me, the solution. His name is Boris Raikin. No one knows him. I worked with him at Goldman Sachs. Even at Goldman Sachs, he was considered wicked smart. And at Goldman, smart is the highest compliment you can pay. Wicked is the second highest compliment. And he was a Russian immigrant, MIT educated. He was a genius at the computer. He will go out and found a company, I hope, and that will employ people. It will keep America on the competitive edge with other countries. So, what we can do? Let's make sure that if Boris comes here to get educated at MIT, we don't send him home because we can't get him a visa.
Merrill, same question to you. What is the single thing that you think we need to do to keep America great?
I think we need to invest in our young, and I don't limit that to the education question. I also include people just entering the workforce and in the young years in the workforce. We used to have a lot of training programs. There used to be ladders inside companies. There used to be a bigger emphasis on, working for the large firm. And I think that we've lost, certainly in the industry I worked in my entire career, which was the newspaper industry, you've lost this sense of career ladders and this way that, when you're 22, 25, 27 years old, you're really not as productive. I mean, in hindsight, I thought I was the bee's knees when I was that age.
Right.
But the reality is that you don't have the experience to be that productive of a worker. And right now, we don't have ladders for those people in order to move through their careers. People are now expected to work in 5, 7, 9 jobs throughout the course of a lifetime. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. We need to adopt our systems, like our healthcare system and our retirement system, to that reality. But that still won't deal with how do we invest in the workforce as it's moving through its product, learning its skills for a lifetime.
Liz, what do we need to do to keep America
Well,
great?
I think both of those are terrific ideas. I would like to see women get more involved in the national debate. I mean, I think there is such a wide, a huge segment of the women in this country who just sort of tune out and they don't pay attention. And had they been paying attention, maybe they would have, stepped on some of these ridiculous mortgages that their husbands were taking out or loans that their husbands were making or whatever.
My wife liked my house even better than I did.
Maybe.
Subprime Tie is my name.
Anyway, but other than that, I mean, going back to what Merrill was talking about, I think we also need to get our country healthier. I think it's now, what, 1/3 of the country is obese. That is just unimaginable, How does that happen? So I think I applaud Michelle Obama's children's efforts. I think we need a huge redo because honestly, this obesity thing is driving our healthcare
In a way,
problem.
it is a metaphor. Eric P., your final thought, and quickly, please.
I would like, I know we've just gone to war again. I think it's time to take a really hard look at the defense budget, Homeland Security budget and start cutting the fat and the waste out of it and shifting those funds to doing just what Merrill's talking about, helping young people. As a father, I'm very concerned about my teenagers coming up, and I want them to have the same opportunities I had coming out of school. They don't have them right now. It's a much tougher economy out there. So that's what I would do.
Lady and gentlemen, thank you very much. Thank you all very much. We'll see you outside.
Thank you, Tyler. Nicely done.
Well done.
Really nicely done.
Thank you.